Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. Yesterday, I talked about marijuana and talked about what Tommy Rosen had to say about marijuana in his book, Recovery 2.0, about the beginning of his journey with the drug, and talked a little bit about my own experience. I want to continue that today because I think it's an important conversation in a day where we are seeing more and more legalization of the drug. Now, I am not against legalization of marijuana. I think that it's far less dangerous than alcohol in general. But there's also misperceptions that it's a drug that you can't get addicted to. And I used to have those perceptions. And that was before I knew that addiction is more about what drugs you're doing and how the drugs affect you, and a lot more about your own psychological state and how that drives you to behave in a particular way. Tommy does a really good job of explaining this in a section where he's talking about when he started to smoke a lot of pot. And I want to read this because it helps to articulate the drivers behind addictive behavior and why even drugs like marijuana that aren't necessarily physically addictive can still contribute to that behavior in a way that requires complete and total sobriety and a program of recovery to get past. What he describes is that he had started to dabble a little bit in marijuana and alcohol, but he was still really into athletics, and he went out for the baseball team during high school. Didn't get picked. Huge disappointment to him, huge blow to his ego. And here's what he says about it. Soon thereafter, I began smoking pot quite a bit. My priorities were shifting. I hung out with other kids who smoked pot and embraced the counterculture that went with that. I had always been a confident kid, athletic. I believed in myself a great deal, but I was also badly driven by ego, emotionally wounded, and caught up in appearances. What others thought of me carried too much weight. I had not yet developed the inner resources that it took to feel okay about myself. A big ego mixed with low self-esteem is a painful and dangerous combination, one of the classic psychological setups for and symptoms of addiction. On the one hand, you have the false sense of reality as seen through the lens of ego. You feel deserving, even entitled. Your perception does not extend beyond your own skin, so you take everything personally. This is called narcissism. Most teenagers have this to some extent. Perhaps I got it to a greater extent. I'm going to stop right there because I want to talk about both the things he mentions. First, he talks about narcissism, this sense of entitlement. And boy, I had that in spades. I felt like the world owed me something. One of the reasons I felt that way is I felt like I had been through more difficulties in my life than other people around me. And I'm now able to look back and call bullshit on that quite a bit. Because while I had been through some difficulties, I know enough now to know that one, they weren't uncommon, and two, everybody goes through difficulties in one way or the other. It's just mine were different than some of the ones my friends were going through. And I also have gained enough humility to know that a lot of my friends were and continue to suffer in silence. So some of the difficulties that they were or are going through, I probably don't know about because they're not as willing to talk about them as I'm willing to talk about mine. The sense of entitlement that comes with that is starting when I start to feel entitled these days. It starts to feel like a rotten feeling. But back in my teenage years and my 20s and early 30s, it was really a feeling that drove a lot of my perception of the world around me. I felt like the world owed me something. I felt like when the world did not give me what I wanted. That was as he says, that was a well, I'll get to that in a second. But when the world didn't provide what I thought I deserved, I took that as a huge affront to me as a person. And so I'll get to this next point that he makes. He says, on the other hand, on one hand, we're so entitled. We feel like we deserve so much because of our heightened sense of ego. On the other hand, he says, you feel so shitty about yourself that any disappointment can totally wreck you. And by the way, let's define disappointment as what results when the world deals up a reality that is different from the way your ego sees things. Such was the case that day. I decided to blame the world for my pain rather than accept that I had learning and growing to do. I didn't have the strength to accept disappointment or failure, whether perceived or real. My impulse at the time was to point out the world's injustices, arrive at the verdict of fuck you as fast as possible, and then take the appropriate next right action. Get good and wasted. Man, how much of my life has been spent doing exactly those things. Being disappointed by the world, giving it the finger, and going and getting wasted. That was my prescription for dealing with a world that I saw as disappointing me on a regular basis. And I never gave much thought into, okay, this is a sign, whatever's happening is a sign that I've got some improvements I can make. Maybe I can make some changes. No, it was always the world around me that needed to change. In recovery, I've learned that in terms of the ego, it's got to be deflated. It's got to be removed as much as possible. I've got to get rid of that ego, that sense of pride, that sense of entitlement. I'm owed, in recovery, I have to embrace the concept of I'm owed nothing by the world. And the measure of a good day for me is not what I've gotten from the world, but what I've given to the world. So that is an important concept for me in recovery, because I think that moving towards that concept is what connects a lot of us with the peace, with the contentment that is really necessary to help us stay sober throughout life. And then as far as dealing with disappointments in the world and learning not to blame the world, I can't tell you how much more pleasant my life has been when I don't sit around finding fault in everybody else. Now, this is hard, and I still have to work on a daily, hourly, sometimes minute by minute basis on this. And I have to be very aware when I'm doing it, because I do it a lot still. I will blame other people for my misfortune, or I will pick at other people, especially those I'm close to, if they behave in a way that's different than I think they should. And this is something that I've had to work on. It is a continual uphill battle for me, but it's one that I'll keep fighting, because I also feel like a key to some of the peace and the serenity that I've found in recovery has been because I've stopped judging other people as much. And instead of looking at what other people should have done different, looking at situations where I feel that disappointment as opportunities for me to grow and for me to change and for me to learn something, rather than focusing on what can the world around me do to be different. So that's it for today. I wanted to focus on why it's not just the drug that we need to be focused on. As a society, we kind of focus on what are the effects of the drug, what happens if you overdose, what happens if you during withdrawal, what does the drug make you do, and we focus less on why are we so engaged in the drug in the first place. And for those of us who have substance use disorders, For those of us who really suffer from that, it comes from a place of pride, ego, fear, and those are the kinds of things that effective recovery programs help us confront and deal with and learn how to constructively change moving forward. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Have a good one.